Rules Committee will come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today. Father Conroy is with us again today. Father, thank you for being here with us with some divine guidance. Do we need to defer to the gentleman for a few minutes today, or we just take your presence as enough? We'll just take that then. Thank you very much. Today, the Rules Committee will consider two important pieces of legislation designed to address the current government shutdown and looming debt issue. The first of these bills would appropriate the funds necessary to pay essential federal employees who have continued their work during the shutdown. These essential men and women have earned their paycheck, and they deserve a right for us to act on this legislation to ensure that they are paid on time. Secondly, the committee will consider legislation to establish a bicameral, bipartisan working group on deficit reduction and economic growth. This is literally a group that would be given the authority and the responsibility to make sure that we solve the problems, to end the government shutdown, to worry about the budget, to worry about deficit reduction, and to work immediately. This group would consist of 10 members of the House of Representatives and 10 members of the Senate, represented by 6, our side in the House of Representatives, 6 Republicans, and 6 Democrats in the Senate, and 4 minority members from each of the other chambers. These members would be appointed no less than 1 day after the enactment of this legislation and would meet immediately by the subsequent day to provide recommendations, overall discretionary spending levels for 2014, changes to the discretionary debt limit, and reforms to direct spending programs. Obviously, this committee, this group, would be a group of bipartisan members who are designed to get this country back on track. It is important that we do this because as the current limitations are taking place, we're simply talking past each other rather than talking to each other and rather than working with each other in the best interest of the American people. Today, our nation faces many serious challenges that require leaders from both sides of the aisle to work together. But to work together, they have to have a process to sit down and look each other and have to deal with the problems. House Republicans have continually asked the Senate Majority Leader and the President to negotiate with us. And we know that up to now that is not working well. So while major disagreement exists, I am here today and confident that a meaningful negotiation can yield the government shutdown and appropriately address our nation's problems and debts. I will tell you my own personal side. I think the American people should take notice to what we are attempting to do. Our president, I think, is different from his predecessors, not in terms of greatness, but rather to the degree by which he is willing to sacrifice this nation's greatness for political power, raw political power, where he will not negotiate, as well understood by the Constitution, of a delineation of powers between the House, the Senate, and the President. The ability, I believe, to do good in office by President Obama is not really his own making. The promise of his position has been built on the shoulders of prior presidents that have come before him, the vast majority of whom displayed a capacity, a willingness, and a desire to negotiate properly with elected members of the people, the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. And I believe what we're trying to do here today places a real distinction upon the House of Representatives, that we are asking the President of the United States and the American people to understand that we believe that real leaders solve problems. They don't go from crisis to crisis. A President of the United States should have to provide leadership, and that includes negotiating with people, even someone that you disagree with. And that is the mark of a leader, and that is why we are here today. Before I welcome the two distinguished gentlemen that are here for presentations, I'd like to yield to the gentlewoman from New York, Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This is certainly different, no question about it. I would talk about leadership. We've not gotten any at all out of the House of Representatives. I talked to a few of you yesterday. I'm great friends with most of you, but I expected better. Another super committee, for crying out loud. Look what happened to the last one. Is there anything in your bill that makes them come to a conclusion? The last one just threw up its hands and said, we can't do another thing. This is leadership. And decide you're going to pay people who are working and who deserve pay and by all rights should be having it. How much simpler the whole issue is. American people, you keep talking about how they appreciate this and that. What they know is that the government isn't working, that they can't get the things done that they need to do through the United States government. All we need to do, what we should have done, is take the Senate clean CR. And that little trick that we had last rule where you said that only the majority leader could bring it up in session to try to put that on the floor. I hope we don't see that one again. But the pressure is certainly mounting, and I'm sure you're aware of that, and the whole country knows now that there are enough votes in the House of Representatives with the Democrat votes and the Republicans on record saying they would really welcome the opportunity to vote for that CR and get the government together again, would give us an opportunity, we hope, to try to get back to regular order, which heaven knows we've not had here for quite a long time. That would solve the problem on both of these issues. And my curiosity about the pay piece is, as you know, the piece that passed here unanimously on retroactive pay is being held by a Republican senator, so that no action has been made on that. I think it's unconscionable. I think it's almost criminal arrogation of our ability to work here. It certainly flies in the face of what we're supposed to be doing, that the 800,000 people who work for the federal government have no idea whether they're going to be paid or not. And there's no earthly reason. When everybody says, again, what was the most logical thing to be asked when you did the pay thing, let's pay them later, was if you're going to pay them later, let them work now. And I don't know how much longer this charade's going to go on. I guess you want to wrap the debt limit up in it now. But I really do regret that we are here today. We've given 2 chances on the floor through the Rules Committee, through the previous question, to bring up the Senate CR and pass it. It doesn't have to go back to the Senate. The President can sign it today. We're grown-ups here. Most of us have served in other legislatures, and we know what we're doing. This is, it defies description in my mind. None of you, I don't believe, could be able to explain to the people back home what in the world it is you're doing here, but blaming it all on the President of the United States doesn't seem to be working very well. Let's get people back to work. Let's get the government going. I know that what the world thinks about us is not always the first thing that comes up in this House, but world press is insinuating that this is a partial display again of the decay of the American society, American government. Let's put a stop to this charade. And today when we go to the floor with this rule, let's put that CR on the floor. We don't need to do another thing but that. I really can't imagine that we're going to put another super committee up there, which, as I read the bill, which was drafted pretty quickly, I suppose, there's no end point to this commission. It can just meet in perpetuity, coming up with no solution. The last thing in the world we need to tell American people, after what they've seen before, is that solution. And I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr.
Gentlewoman yields back her time, and I appreciate the gentlewoman's discussion. For some bit of clarity, and I am not in the other body, but I would offer that I believe that what the gentlewoman characterized is correct, that there is a Republican senator, gentleman from Texas, John Cornyn, who is holding up the bill, which I would say I understand, because what he's attempting to do is to amend the bill to add all the other piece parts of the bills that the Senate Majority Leader is holding up, getting people back to work, and that he would wrap it into one package and make those votes occur, which the Senate's being held from. The bill that the gentlewoman is in reference to is what happens after we resolve the matter, which means it would be after there is an agreement. So it's not like that's holding up anything. In fact, what Senator Cornyn is trying to do is to get people back to work and have the Senate vote on it, as opposed to being obstructionist and not having them vote to get the NIH and other bills that we have passed get those people back to work, essential or not. They are part of our government. They give people services, and I think we need them back on the job. I appreciate the gentlewoman's comments. We also want to welcome two distinguished gentlemen today from the Appropriations Committee here to talk about H.J. Res. 89, the Federal Worker Pay Fairness Act. And we welcome the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Financial Services and also the Ranking Member. And both of you, as always, would be considered not just expert witnesses, but men who represent your committee, the thought processes, not only the gentleman, Mr. Serrano, but also the gentleman from Florida, my dear friend. And as always, anything you have in writing will be entered into the record without objection. The gentleman from Florida, please make sure, I can't tell if you got your microphone on, but please make sure your microphone on. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Slaughter, and esteemed members of the Rules Committee. I'm here today to present H.J. Res. 89. This legislation fulfills a very important responsibility that we have as members of Congress, providing on-time pay for those federal employees who've been working throughout this government shutdown. I'm here today to ask for an appropriate rule on this legislation to allow for prompt consideration on the House floor. To briefly summarize the bill before you, it ensures that the personnel who have been working for the federal government throughout this shutdown are compensated for their time. Over the past 8 days, these dedicated men and women have put in countless hours of work in service for this nation. Just last week, we saw the Capitol Police run into harm's way in the line of duty. This bill will ensure that they take home a paycheck. This bill will also take care of all the federal employees who are working during this shutdown to ensure the safety and well-being, to provide critical services for our people, to protect businesses from suffering unduly, and to lend a helping hand to some of the most vulnerable citizens. And just like everyone else, they have mortgages to pay, they have car payments, they've got utility bills, they've got mouths to feed. And for their work over the past week, and for the work they will continue to do until this shutdown ends, these men and women deserve to be paid on time. It's been the goal of the Appropriations Committee to provide for the timely continued pay of our federal workforce through regular appropriations bills enacted before the end of the fiscal year. And I hope we never have to come to this point again. I believe that most parties can agree that this bill is a step that must be taken, just as we united this weekend to authorize retroactive pay for the furloughed employees on a unanimous basis. I thank the gentlemen and women of this committee for their consideration of this important bill, and I strongly urge its adoption on the House floor today.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for being here today, and your insistence to get this bill quickly done, I hope was met with our resolve to meet today. And I want to also welcome your dear colleague and my dear friend, the gentleman from New York, the gentleman, Mr. Serrano, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While no one can argue against paying our essential employees, I wish that we were here to consider a bill that would reopen the entire government. This bill would pay all essential federal employees across the government as they would normally be paid, irrespective of the shutdown. While this bill will provide some certainty for our federal employees, there is a much easier and better method of accomplishing this goal. This committee should be providing right now a rule for consideration of the Clean Senate Continuing Resolution, which would reopen our federal government immediately. Even if the House passes the bill being considered here today, the shutdown is still causing many problems for Americans that depend upon federal agencies for assistance and protection. Within the subcommittee that I am the ranking member of, Financial Services and General Government Subcommittee, the shutdown has required the small business administrations, for instance, to furlough almost 2/3 of its workforce. The agency has had to shutter almost all of its loan programs for our nation's small businesses, including loan programs for veterans, women-owned small businesses, and small businesses located in underserved areas. Within the federal judiciary, the federal defenders currently have enough funding to continue operations for a couple of weeks. However, once that time is up, they will be unable to fulfill their constitutional duty to uphold the Sixth Amendment rights of criminal defendants. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, listen to this one, has been cut from 540 employees to 22, making it difficult for the agency to perform its duty of fully reviewing thousands of different kinds of products. This will clearly increase the risk to the public. The IRS has been forced to furlough most of their workforce, preventing the agency from providing taxpayer assistance to those who have questions, to examine questionable tax returns, or even to accept paper tax filings. The IRS brings in the vast majority of our nation's revenue, and the Republican shutdown is harming our ability to pay our bills. All of these agencies need and deserve a continuing resolution so they can perform the many functions of government that remain essential to American consumers, investors, taxpayers, and small businesses. A clean CR would do just that. And I know that, that this is no time to be funny, but I think if we were to keep taking one bill at a time and maybe 2025 before we open the full government, when in fact we could do it in one day and then sit down and talk about the rest of the issues. So I thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Serrano, thank you very much, not only for your clear testimony, but also appearing with the gentleman, Mr. Crenshaw. I'm delighted that you were here today. He is a very dear friend and a colleague and a good man, and I appreciate you both being here. I understand the issue, and I appreciate you both being here, and thank you very much. I defer to the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of our colleagues for being here today. I have no questions, but I appreciate their work and their effort on this. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back time. Gentlewoman from New York. That's okay. Gentlewoman does not seek, has no question. Gentleman yields back time. Gentleman from Utah. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman, Chairman from Oklahoma is recognized. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm tempted to provoke my colleague from Utah, but the better part of wisdom dictates that I don't provoke him right now.
Gentleman seeks
No question.
to yield back his time. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized. Gentleman has no question. Gentleman from Colorado, no questions. Gentleman from Florida, no question. Gentleman from Orlando, Florida, does not seek time. Gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burgess, does not seek time. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you taking time not only to represent your ideas that you have, but also wish you the very best for a beautiful day. Father Conroy is probably here for Mrs. Slaughter and myself. You may have thought you had extra help, and I hope that you'll leave with that feeling too. I want to thank both of you. You're now excused.
I do have one question, Mr. Chairman. Is the shutdown responsible for the fact that this room is so cold?
The room is a perfect temperature to the chairman. If you wish to, if you would wish to seek a change in that, you may petition me at any time.
Notwithstanding my 63 years in New York, I was born on a tropical island.
The gentleman sees me every morning and knows how to complain. I would consider that a very favorable comment. When you're from Dallas, Texas, you kind of like the air conditioning. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This now ends the portion of the hearing, HJ Res 89, Federal Worker Pay Fairness Act. I would now call up H3223, Deficit Reduction Economic Growth Working Group Act of 2013, and would recognize the gentleman from Maryland, my dear friend, the ranking member of the Budget Committee, and am delighted that you are here. And as always, Mr. Van Hollen, when you appear before us, we're delighted with anything you have in writing without objection. That will be entered into the record, and the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be here, and I just want to commend the committee on the piece of legislation you just discussed, which is to make sure that people who are working, like the Capitol Police, get paid on time. I also want to commend the House on the unanimous vote on Saturday to make sure that federal employees should not be penalized for actions that are beyond their control. I thought that was the right thing to do. I do think people are very puzzled, Mr. Chairman, about the fact that having said that we're going to make sure that we pay all the federal employees on time at all and pay federal employees at all federal agencies, that we wouldn't act today to make sure they can go to work at all federal agencies. I think the American people are a little puzzled about the fact that we're going to do the right thing and make sure they all get compensated for this period of time, but they're puzzled why we wouldn't have them all go back to work today. And that, of course, is within our power to do if we were simply to have a vote on the bill that came from the Senate that would immediately open the entire government without preconditions. And again, I would urge the body to do that. The Speaker has it in his power. As you know, Mr. Chairman, this committee actually took away a right that belongs to every member, Democrat or Republican, when we're in the situation we are now where there's a disagreement between the House and the Senate. Under the standing House rules, any member of this Congress had the right to call up the Senate bill. And on October 1st, this committee took away that right from every member and gave it exclusively to the Republican leader, who has used it to keep government shut down by refusing to bring up that bill. Now, Mr. Chairman, let me talk for a second about the other bill that's before us and just remind every member here, and you've been at a lot of these hearings, that the Democrats in the House and the Senate, as well as the President of the United States, have been trying to have a negotiation on the budget since the beginning of this year. In this House, we passed a budget in March. I see some of my friends from the Budget Committee here. They know that. In March, the United States Senate also passed a budget. The regular order, which the Speaker called for, says that the House and the Senate should appoint budget negotiators to work out the differences between those budgets. The Speaker has refused to appoint budget negotiators. That's a fact. I introduced a resolution in April calling upon the Speaker to appoint House budget negotiators. He refused to do it. We tried 3 times in the House to get a vote to appoint negotiators to go negotiate with the Senate on the budget. In the United States Senate, on 18 occasions, maybe even 19 now, the Senate Majority Leader and the Chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Patty Murray, have tried to get consent to appoint budget negotiators. That's a fact. They were blocked on all 18 occasions by Republican senators. Senator McCain said it was, quote, insane, unquote, for Senate Republicans to be blocking budget negotiators, since, after all, Republicans had been calling for years on the Senate to pass a budget. They passed legislation saying no budget, no pay, and then they went on to block the appointment of negotiators in both the House and the Senate, not really telling the American people that when they said no budget, no pay, they didn't mean that we should have a federal budget. Apparently just a House budget and a separate Senate budget would do. So right now we don't have a federal budget and everybody's still getting paid. And the record is very clear and indisputable that the Speaker of the House blocked the appointment of budget negotiators, and in the Senate, Senate Republicans blocked the appointment of budget negotiators. So the clock ticked. We went past the statutory April 15 deadline for a conference committee to report. Obviously, a conference committee can't report if you don't appoint budget negotiators to the conference committee. So the clock ticked, and we got up against the wall on a government shutdown and on the debt ceiling to pay our country's bills on time. So what happened first on the continuing resolution? There was a negotiation. The Speaker of the House on national television on Sunday told the public that he had a negotiation with the Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid. He picked up the phone, Harry Reid did. They had a discussion, and they had a negotiated agreement. What was the agreement? The agreement was that the Democrats would accept the lower sequester level of funding for the government for a short period of time in exchange for the Speaker agreeing not to add extraneous, unrelated provisions to keeping the government open. They had a negotiation. They had an agreement. That's what the Speaker said on national television. And then he said, well, he couldn't keep his agreement because he had a faction within the House Republican caucus that demanded that in order to keep the federal government open, we would have to start to shut down the Affordable Care Act. That's what he said. So he walked away from a negotiated agreement, which brings us to where we are now. And of course, the irony is here in the House, we do have the votes to immediately open the entire government if the Speaker would only put it to a vote. And if he has any doubt about it, there's a simple way to find out. Hold a vote. Now, after saying you don't want to negotiate on the budget for month after month after month, you come up with this provision to create some other kind of committee. You call it a super committee, call it whatever you want. I would point out that the last super committee didn't turn out very well. After 3 months, it produced nothing, unfortunately. And now here, when we're already in a government shutdown, when we're about 7 days from defaulting on our debt obligations, all of a sudden, let's create another committee, not the budget committee, which is supposed to, under the regular order, negotiate things, but another committee, because you didn't want to have that negotiation in the normal course. And look, the President's been very clear. We want to negotiate, but we're not going to negotiate away the full faith and credit of the United States. The full faith and credit of the United States, I hope we would all agree, is not negotiable. We don't think keeping the government open is something that's negotiable. And think about it this way. I just want to ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to just think about this. What if the President of the United States said this? What if he said, I'm going to veto a debt ceiling bill? I'm going to veto the bill to pay the country's bills on time unless you House Republicans agree to my budget, to the President's budget. What if the President said, I'm going to veto the debt ceiling bill and I'm going to refuse to pay our bills on time unless House Republicans adopt the Senate budget? You would say that was absolutely outrageous. You would say that was an abuse of power and process. And you'd be right. But that's exactly what House Republicans are doing now. They're threatening to not pay our bills on time, bills that have been incurred by this Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike. You're threatening to not pay our bills on time unless you get to reduce the deficit the way you want to do it or seek other policy changes like changing the Affordable Care Act. That's your position. Our position is, yeah, we want to negotiate. As I said, you have a House budget and there's a Senate budget. We negotiate between the two budgets. That's the conversation we should have. The House budget reduces the deficit a certain way. We disagree with lots of things in the House Republican budget. The Senate Democratic budget reduces the deficit in a different way. It takes a balanced approach to reducing the deficit, meaning a combination of targeted cuts, but also cuts to tax expenditures, cuts to certain tax breaks in order to help reduce the deficit in a balanced way. It replaces the sequester, which the CBO tells us will cost us 800,000 jobs by this time next year. It has a jobs plan to invest in our infrastructure and education, science, and research. So the Senate has a budget, and the President has a budget, and House Republicans have a budget. We should negotiate those two budgets. That's the conversation, but the conversation you're trying to turn it into is, hey, in exchange for Republicans agreeing to do what every member should do, which is pay our bills on time, Mr. President, you've got to give us our budget, or big parts of our budget. You've got to do it our way in exchange for us to do the right thing. And when it comes to government shutdown, we'll only keep the government open if you agree to our way on the Affordable Care Act. So that is not a negotiation. That is taking hostages and demanding that you get your budget your way, or else you're not going to release those hostages. And we all know how dangerous it is to hold the full faith and credit of the United States hostage. Now, Mr. Chairman, let me make the last point. Even in this process of setting up a committee, it's a fake negotiation. I couldn't believe my eyes when I read this thing. So what it says is a bicameral working group on deficit reduction and economic growth. And then it gives the working group its charter. It tells you what you can look at. Okay, we're supposed to look at overall discretionary spending. Well, we've been trying to do that. That's the whole issue about trying to replace the sequester. We want to replace the sequester. We've had numerous proposals to do it. Tried to get a vote 8 times in this House on our plan to replace the sequester. Never a chance. Never an up or down vote. It says changes in the statutory limit on the public debt. Again, as I said, that is something that should not be negotiable in terms of whether we pay our bills on time. And then it says reforms in direct spending programs. And as we've said, and on the Budget Committee, we should look at direct spending programs. Our proposal to replace the sequester gets rid of some excessive agriculture subsidies. There are other things we should look at. But that's it. Guess what's missing from the purpose? Under this charter for this sham negotiation, this committee could not even discuss closing a tax loophole for the purpose of reducing the deficit. Imagine that. Deficit reduction. But you can't talk about closing a tax loophole to help reduce the deficit. That is a farce by any definition, Mr. Chairman. And I think the members of this committee know that. There are 2 sides to the equation when it comes to the budget and deficit reduction, and that has been the debate for years and years now. We've argued that we should reduce the long-term deficit through a combination of targeted and smart cuts and by cutting special interest tax breaks. Tax breaks for very high-income individuals, we say that they should get the same level of deductions as middle-income taxpayers. We want to close special interest tax breaks for hedge fund owners. But the way you set this up, you can't do that as part of achieving deficit reduction. It's not listed among the things that this committee can consider. And, Mr. Chairman, that is a sham, as I said, by any common sense definition. So, look, when our Republican colleagues want to stop holding the full faith and credit of the United States hostage, and when they want to stop holding the operations of the federal government hostage, we would love to do what we've been trying to do since March, which is have a budget negotiation between our 2 budgets. But that negotiation on the budgets, when it takes place, can't be done in a way that you eliminate 1/2 of the deficit reduction argument. So, Mr. Chairman, I wished that maybe our colleagues had put something that would actually provide a path forward. This is not it, and the path forward is pretty clear, which is to allow democracy to work its will. Hold a vote today in the House of Representatives, and the lights could go on in the federal government tonight. The President's waiting for that bill to sign. Thank you.
I appreciate the gentleman not only appearing today, but his thoughtful comments. The rest of the story, as sometimes we've heard, I don't intend to tell today, but I would say that I do recognize that the differences between our parties are probably $1 trillion in spending and $1 trillion in taxes. That I do get. The difference between the Democrat budget in the Senate, the Democrat alternative in the House, and where Republicans are is a wide gulf. What I think we're attempting to accomplish here, not only myself as the original co-sponsor of this bill, by the way, I know the gentleman would disagree with my bill, and that's okay, is the Speaker, the Majority Leader, and I are attempting to work through a process in another way, and that is to empower the members. And by the way, I'm not Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat leader, and I haven't even spoken with her, but you'd be one of the first persons that I would put immediately on this conference. And I would trust your ability to not only work in a collegial manner, but in a way that represented thoughtful ideas about how to resolve the differences, as opposed to perhaps more public figures like the Senate Majority Leader, the President of the United States, and Speaker of the House. I think what we're trying to do is to empower people to get something done, as opposed to putting them into a process that would not work. I would, quite honestly, I would trust you in that environment. So we're trying not to wrap your hands up. We're trying to give you a mission statement. But with that said, the gentleman is correct. I am not in favor of one of your pet projects to tax gasoline at the pump. You and I both know we disagree with this. As a strong supporter, notwithstanding, I know you are too, but of people who have children that are disabled and they have bigger vehicles. And one of the things that I'm very sensitive about is families who are able to avoid gasoline that's already twice as expensive under President Obama as it was before he took office. And many of these families are having problems. On the other side, you mentioned taxes as it relates to perhaps upper income people. Back home, there are people who believe if they are paying, they're working hard because they have a job, and not everybody's got a job, but if they are paying money as a high income earner for others who have no participation in the process, that they should not be held back from how much they can deduct on a pre-tax basis. And there are a lot of people who are trying to take care of their families also who are struggling to pay the bills of taxes and their family. And so what Republicans are not interested in particular perhaps me, is not increasing taxes on people who are paying the taxes, who are paying for others who, through a misfortune, not always their own, but who are helping pay for people to be able to have things, and that they would like the same right to take care of their families. So we're opposed to tax increases. That's why it's not in there. So if we start with the definition, because I wrote the bill, you're right, we disagree. What I don't think would happen is I don't think that you would be met in this committee if you were chosen to be one of the people that you would not have an opportunity to effectively work with your colleagues. And that's what I think we're trying to do. So I appreciate the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond on that.
I was speaking about gentlemen. He certainly would be allowed to do that. And my dear friend, gentleman.
No, thank you.
Yes, sir.
It's been great working with you on important issues.
Well, I hope we're not through yet.
Disabilities, but no, it's true. Look, number one, I have not called for an increase in the gas tax, so let's just be clear about that.
No, sir.
What I have said is that I think that we should get rid of the tax breaks for the top 4 integrated oil companies, and all the testimony before this Congress indicates that because you have a pretty competitive market in that area, they would not raise prices at the pump. They would reduce the profits, which have been huge, because if you raise your price at the pump and the smaller guys are not, then obviously you're going to get less customers. And so this is a way to remove the taxpayer subsidy for big oil companies that was an accident of history to begin with, number one. Number two, when I talk about higher income people being able to take more, what we're talking to share in responsibility, what I'm talking about is saying to folks who are making over $1 million a year that you shouldn't be able to get more in terms of tax deductions than someone who's in a middle income area. In other words, you should get the same, say, for example, 28% tax break on write-off for your deductions instead of a 39% or 37% tax rate, so that the millionaire doesn't get excessive deductions in comparison to a middle income folks. So when we're talking about reducing the budget deficit, we believe that you can only do it in a way that doesn't do great violence to important investments and to commitments we've made to our seniors on Medicare and other important areas without having a shared responsibility approach. So yes, we need to make additional cuts as part of the long-term deficit plan. But we believe we should also cut these tax breaks going forward. And if you don't do that, then you really are going to do violence to some important commitments we've made to seniors and others. And that is why we've had a bounce. But we can disagree on that.
And we do.
But that's our whole point. That's what the budget negotiation between the House and the Senate, which we've been trying to have since March, is supposed to resolve. And you can't resolve it when the Speaker has blocked budget negotiators. And I think the gentleman knows that. And so And you can't resolve it when you write a new committee whose charter excludes the whole question of trying to have some loophole closures in order to reduce the deficit.
I appreciate, gentlemen. In fact, closing loopholes, as your suggestion, is a tax increase. And I am absolutely opposed to further tax increases. I'm well aware, I've been up here a few years. I know who wants the tax increases and who doesn't. I also know that somebody's interested, they're called Republicans, in taking the $700 billion out of Obamacare that went for funding the program back to seniors. So we offer each other a lot of solace about the position we're in. I hope that when this passes, that the Senate will look at it as an opportunity, and it would be my expectation that you would be one of the bright souls who would be given this authority and responsibility. And I thank gentlemen being here. I yield to the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentleman from Maryland, but I have no questions. I yield
Gentlewoman
back.
yields back time. Gentlewoman from New York.
Mr. Van Hollen, I'm pretty speechless, but I thank you so much for coming. I think your presentation was cogent. It hit all the points that we need to hit. But as we know, we're all crying in the wilderness here, and nothing that we're doing here today is going to move the well-being and the economic future of this country a scintilla of an inch. I understand we're even going to get another mini CR, so on with the dance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back time. Gentleman from Utah is recognized. Gentleman yields back time. The gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as you know, this is a question of process. I've complained that a number of bills that have been brought before this committee have never been heard by the committees of jurisdiction. And this bill, the original jurisdiction is the Rules Committee. Are we going to have an original jurisdiction hearing, or is this hearing on the rule basically going to substitute for that?
Thank you very much. This is the Committee of Original Jurisdiction, and that is what we're doing right now.
We're not having a separate hearing.
I appreciate the gentleman. I appreciate the gentleman. In fact, there's a lot of truth to what the gentleman said, and that is what I chose to do this today. I will tell you how this happened. This happened because there was a report out of the White House yesterday that senior advisors to the President have said that the President would sooner have the United States default than him negotiate. And that was a position that was absolutely right out of the White House yesterday.
I could assure you that's not the President's
Well, I'm
position.
simply telling you that was the report, and we're trying to work around that. The Speaker of the House and I, Majority Leader, the whip, it is outrageous, and that's why we're here today.
Right.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the Chairman. Today's October 8th, am I correct?
I believe that's correct.
October 17th, we are going to default on our financial obligations if we don't do something. This is day 9 of the government, Republican government shutdown, and this is what we're bringing to the floor. As I'm reading this, there's nothing in this thing that, I mean, you've been talking about negotiations with the President, nothing in here that even mentions the President.
It does not. In fact, the gentleman's correct.
And there's nothing in here that says that if you pass this, the government reopens. Am I correct about that? This is not, if passing this does not reopen the government.
In fact, it's my hope that the American people would see firsthand in negotiations on TV that there are 20 people that are there for the best interest of the American people, and
there's
would gain that advantage.
So the answer on that is no. And there's nothing in here that deals with the issue of our debt, the debt ceiling, which comes on October 17th. And you know, I mean, there are no instructions, or just some basic guidance. I mean, I think the last thing we need at this moment is yet another committee. Mr. Van Hollen is the ranking Democrat on the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee, led by Mr. Ryan, I disagree with him profoundly on a whole bunch of issues, nonetheless went through the process of coming up with a budget. I think it's a very flawed budget. Senator Murray over in the Senate did the same thing. And so, you know, everyone's talking about regular order here. You have a House budget, the Senate budget. It would seem to me that you already have the committees exist to resolve the differences. And if you don't think they can resolve the differences, appoint the conferees so they can at least try. You know, if they, you know, some days go by and they can't make any headway, then you can talk about something else. But, I mean, for 6 months we've been trying to get a conference going on that. But this doesn't do anything. This doesn't stop the government shutdown. This doesn't deal with the issue of the debt, the debt ceiling. I'll call this the super committee to the wrath of Cruz. I don't know what else to call it. I mean, it's like it's nothing at a time when we need to be doing something to reopen the government and to deal with this looming threat of defaulting on the good faith and credit of the United States. I mean, I'm just a little bit stunned that at this moment, it doesn't even tell you how long this committee is supposed to meet. Or it doesn't empower the committee with anything other than, getting together and talking. I just, even for you guys, I expected something a little bit more thoughtful at this late stage, and we're running out of time. We're running out of time here, it is what it is, and we'll bring it to the floor and go through this charade and, again, waste some more time. But this is not what we should be doing. We should be, that is a simple answer. Pass the clean CR at your levels. You won on that. You got your numbers. You won. Do that, deal with the debt ceiling, and then sit down, get the budget committees of both the House and the Senate to get together and work out their differences so we can deal with our long-term spending and deficit issues, and actually respect regular order, which is something that you all say you want to do. So that would be my suggestion. I thank the chairman for yielding.
I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma. Chairman Cole's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions for my good friend from the Budget Committee, but I'll make one observation, which is I don't wish that you were on this committee. You're my friend. I wouldn't. I wouldn't put my friend on this committee, but I know if that opportunity presented itself to you, I know that you'd take it up seriously and responsibly and conduct yourself to credit the institution. So
thank you.
Yield back.
Thank you.
You see, you have a lot of friends
Thank
up
you.
here, Mr. Van Hollen. I'm not the only one that's your dear friend that's here. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Everybody in this room that are members of Congress were elected to do exactly what this legislation calls for some working group to do. It may come as no surprise to you that there are those of us that are in Congress that were not happy with any committee of Congress being divided, and whether Mr. Van Hollen or anybody else was on it. I feel my responsibilities to my constituency and to America of equal weight to any member that is a member of any one of these so-called separate committees. Now, I awakened this morning and came here, and the first thing that came to me before I came to the Capitol early this morning was the facts from one of my staff from something called BuzzFeed. And BuzzFeed was mindful of what you all were getting ready to do before you went to your conference. I had absolutely no idea. I serve on the Rules Committee, as do all of the members that are here, and I had no idea we would be discussing anything like this today. Eric Cantor, the majority leader, discharging his responsibilities, had put out a voting schedule that called for us to vote on other matters. Of course, this is the Rules Committee. You can bring up anything that you want at any given time under the martial law, under the same day. But then I heard you, Mr. Chairman, just say to Mr. McGovern that this is occurring, meaning this establishment of a bicameral working group, because some person, unidentified evidently, otherwise I would hope that you would call that person's name, said that the president would let the nation default. And so therefore, this is the position that you're taking because of some anonymous somebody saying something about the president? Is that what you're doing here?
I appreciate the gentleman asking me a question. In fact, the Speaker of the House has been engaged in negotiations, went last week, I believe, to the White House, and the President indicated that, thank you for coming down here, he's not interested in negotiating. So it simply reinforced a continued effort that we believe from the White House, so we're trying to work around that. We're trying to work with members.
With all due
It would
respect,
go
Mr.
back to
Chairman,
John.
reclaiming my time just to put yet an additional question to you, and then I will yield to the ranking member for a question. But that's not what I asked you. What you just said was that someone said that the president would allow us to default on our debt. And your comment was, based on that, that's why you are doing what we are doing here. And I ask you, is that true? Is that why you're doing this? And then you responded just then by saying that someone went to the White House a week ago and the president, and I gather that's the meeting that the president called for, and the president said, and doubtless it's true, that he was not going to negotiate away the debt ceiling. So what is it? I mean, why are you bringing this useless piece of legislation that obviously you would know is not going anywhere? Is it based on some anonymous statement?
Gentleman, yield.
Yes, of course.
I do appreciate the gentleman. I do understand, I believe, that the gentleman is opposed to this. With that said, we have brought numerous pieces of legislation to the floor in response to not only the CR, but also how we deal with the government shutdown. And I'm well aware that there are things that the gentleman agrees with and some that he has agreed with them and been against them. We believe that what we're trying to do is to say to House members and Senate members, we think that outside of the leadership of both of these organizations and the President, we ought to put our best thinkers. We didn't try and say who would be on the committee. We simply said it'd be an equal number and that they have a mission. They've got to meet no later than 1 day after they're appointed. They've got to be appointed within 1 day.
I get
Let's
that.
get to work. That's what we're trying to say.
Yeah, all right. Let me yield
Thank you,
to
gentlemen.
Ms. Slaughter for a question.
I appreciate you're doing that because what you're saying here is very important. As I heard what the chairman said, was that the president had stated that he would prefer default. Is that correct, what you said?
No, ma'am. I said that the senior advisor said that the president would sooner default than to engage in the negotiation. We can get the quote for you. I think it's available by request. I'd never heard of this other buzz
Well,
group.
I certainly want to see it. I would think that would be
very
such
pleased
big
to show
news.
it to you,
Everybody
gentlemen.
would.
Be very
That
pleased to
the
show it.
president is not going to do any such thing.
By the
He
way,
has said
the
all
Speaker of the
along
House.
that the faith and credit, full faith and credit of the United States is so important to him that he will not negotiate over it.
If the gentleman
And I
would allow
agree
me.
with him.
The
Yes.
Speaker of the House yesterday went on the floor and acknowledged exactly the characterization that is more correct, by the way the Speaker said it when he spoke yesterday publicly on the floor of the House of Representatives, and that is what told us that we need to go a different route and try and work with members. I would
We've
thank the
heard a lot
gentleman
of
for the time.
characterizations
Thank
about
you.
people who have been totally untrue, and I'd be careful about
Well,
that. But here's what I interrupted Mr. Hastings to say. We understand that there's now a new bill that's going to be added to the schedule today on these many CRs on the FAA, which has had absolutely no committee action again. We have not seen this bill. We know absolutely nothing about it. I'm assuming that you'll have to recess now because I don't think it's here, as far as I know. But I will tell you that we object most strenuously to the way that this government is being run. That what you're saying, not only is that nearly half of the House of Representatives not worthy of being in a committee so that they can have some input on what's being done, but the Rules Committee, which is supposed to be the final spot before a piece of legislation goes to the floor, have no idea what's happening until we come up here and get to see it. We saw this thing 30 minutes ago. And I want to really ask you, is that what we're going to do today, and are there any more coming?
Yes, ma'am, and thank you very much.
There are more coming.
And thank you very much
Yeah, you'll talk
for the gentlewoman and
Yes.
the gentleman. In fact, we will continue to have pieces of legislation that will be added up to and including some that will be tomorrow, some will be later, and that do address the needs of the business. And we do agree with you. We don't agree with the way the government's being run either.
The needs of the
I would yield
business
back.
are to open up the United States government. This is such a farce. I have to tell you the truth. I can't sit here and act as though I'm giving this credence. The truth is, all we have to do is open up the government, put the people back to work. This strange dance we're going through here of legislation is just not worthy of the United States government. And I thank you very much for yielding.
And I thank the chairman as well. But now let me give the chairman and the members some new news. As of 11:30 this morning, the White House issued this statement. Late this morning, the President telephoned Speaker John Boehner from the Oval Office and repeated what he told him when they met at the White House last week. The President is willing to negotiate with Republicans after the threat of government shutdown and default have been removed over policies that Republicans think would strengthen the country. The President also repeated his willingness to negotiate on priorities that he has identified, including policies that expand economic opportunity, support private sector job creation, enhance the competitiveness of American business, and strengthen the Affordable Care Act and continue to reduce the nation's deficit. The President urged the Speaker to hold a vote in the House of Representatives on the Senate-passed measure that would reopen the federal government immediately. Citing the Senate's intention to pass a clean year-long extension of the debt limit this week, the President also pressed the Speaker to allow a timely up or down vote in the House to raise the debt limit with no ideological strings attached. He noted that only Congress has the authority to raise the debt limit, and failure to do so would have grave consequences for middle-class families and the American economy as a whole. That's the latest statement from the President that is in complete refutation of any anonymous statements that any staff person may have said, and is pretty clear. But, Mr. Chairman, I want to come back to you and ask you again another question. Can you, Speaker Boehner, for whom I have great respect, guarantee that if this commission or working group, as it's called in the proposed legislation, were to meet and bring out findings that you and or the Speaker more specifically can guarantee that his Tea Party members will support those recommendations?
I thank gentlemen and for yielding, and I would like to say, and the gentleman, Mr. Boehner, does recognize your friendship and support of representing your district, and is delighted that you're here on the Rules Committee with us. And that is an outstanding question. What I would say to the gentleman is that as the American people hear the debate that takes place between these members who would be there, we're hoping that the American people really engage on this issue, an idea that would have great leverage with all of our members, and it would be, I think, beneficial. And as best I can tell you, right, as I look at the gentlewoman from New York, I think the American people do need to see how we're going to do this, and would become engaged behind common sense ideas. And I appreciate the gentleman for asking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have additional questions. And one of them is in reading and rereading the legislation and then asking my staff to review it. It says absolutely nothing about how much this will cost. Now, these committees don't just come into existence all of a sudden and don't cost anything. So since you've left that out, I would hope before we report out the rule, and normally I'm in agreement with reporting out the rule most immediately, but normally it isn't good enough in these times. At least we ought to have some idea about how much it will cost the taxpayers to establish such a commission and to have it render its majority and minority reports. Does the chairman have an answer to that question?
In fact, I do, and I appreciate the gentleman deferring to me. The working group is what this is called. It is, in fact, a working group. It is not a committee. It is a working group, bicameral, bipartisan, men, women.
How much does it cost?
Yeah, I appreciate the gentleman, and so we have not gone and calculated that. I would say to the gentleman, I appreciate the question, and we think this working group can get done and get the work and would be done.
Man, you sure do have a strange way of evading questions.
You know what? If I had an answer, I'd give it to you.
Well, I'm delighted to know that you don't have an answer, and that's what should be in this legislation. All of the other legislation that created committees created the financing of those committees or working groups or whatever you want to call them. But the simple fact is, this one does not. And I will offer an amendment to the rule that will allow that we do at least establish something, if nothing more than to say that each member's member representational allowance, and we can do that for the House, but we can't do it for the Senate. And somehow or another, we're off the track here altogether. But I don't understand perpetuating legislation and allowing for a working group to be established. And if they don't have good working staff, as some of the others have had, and they have produced fine products that went absolutely nowhere in this Congress. And I'd range all the way back to good friends of mine that did the Concord Coalition long before we get to where we are. Now, apparently your staffer wants to have me say something that you need to say, so let me yield to you.
Well, I appreciate it, gentlemen, but what I wanted to reply back is, if we use as a standard the committee, which was for the purpose of trying to cut a deal of long-term debt, we did give them a designation. We gave them a time frame. We told them, by and large, what to do, what the rules of the game
The super committee you're talking about now.
I am. We are not trying to do that at all. We're trying to establish a working group who
All
come
right.
up with recommendations who would be able to effectively turn this around. We're not talking about, I appreciate this. In fact, we're trying to get a resolution of some ideas to help us work
I'll yield
better
to the
together.
I think I may have a solution. We have the Budget Committee that has already been constituted, that staff are already been, they have the salaries are in place. I'm sure Mr. Van Hollen would not object to having a conference committee be televised so the American people could have the discussion that you want, and then we don't have to worry about adding any more money. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We already have the wheel here.
Well, first off, I thank the gentleman very much, but what you've done here in this legislation that you propose, as Mr. Van Hollen has wisely pointed out, that you say that the working group's charge is, number one, overall levels of discretionary spending, including for the fiscal year ending on September 30, 2014. It's more like 19, since it seems like we're going back to previous centuries with all of this stuff. But the simple fact of the matter is something that's revenue neutral, and that's basically what you've done. And I would ask Mr. Van Hollen, do you perceive it the same as I do, this particular language, that how it is your charge would be revenue neutral, since it would not include any potential for spending and revenue increases?
Yes, Mr. Hastings. What this says is, even though the title says deficit reduction, it would only allow this group to pursue one kind of deficit reduction. You would not be allowed to both do targeted cuts, which we should do, and targeted cuts and cuts to tax breaks. And again, we talked about big oil company subsidies. You've got, big Wall Street hedge fund owners who get a much lower tax rate than the ordinary Americans. Under this legislation, the way it's drawn, you couldn't reduce the deficit by 1 penny by closing some of those tax breaks.
Absolutely. And in this nation, 1% of the people in this country have hijacked the middle class, quite frankly, and that's, I believe, what my colleagues on the Democrat side are trying to do, and that is increase the middle class and widen it so that this nation can go forward. But this legislation, I predict for you, I don't even imagine that Harry Reid is going to allow it to even reach the pile at his desk. But let me borrow from Ezra Klein, a favorite of mine. He writes today, "Fool me with a budget commission once, shame on you. Fool me 8 times." And I think it's important for the people to know that he lists the partial list of bipartisan budget negotiations we've had since 2010. The Simpson-Bowles Commission, which people forget was the legacy of a 2010 debt ceiling increase, the Domenici-Rivlin Commission, the Cantor-Biden talks, the Obama-Boehner debt ceiling negotiations, the Gang of 6 talks, the Super Committee, the Obama fiscal cliff talks, and every last one of them went absolutely nowhere, although there are many things, and even as late as now, I would support the Simpson-Bowles Commission, and had we done it at that time, it would have made an awful lot of sense. And had we done what the senator from Vermont and his people had done with the Concord Coalition, well, things in there that I would not have agreed upon, but might put us in a better position that we're in this nation today. And all I would say is, and I ask you this, Mr. Chairman, this will be my final question, what happens if and when this commission, if it were, or working group, excuse me, if this working group fails and the next CR and debt ceiling increase needs to be passed. What happens then when this one doesn't work? I yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for his question, and the answer is that I believe what we're trying to do is to come up with an idea to empower members as opposed to the leadership route that we've been doing where our leaders have worked together, and I think our leaders have been unable to do that. And I appreciate the gentleman not only for his thoughtful questions, but also his answers, but would say to the gentleman, this is another opportunity, and we're going to keep throwing them out, just as we have others, and hoping that sooner or later.
I thank the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman.
Borrow my time back just to say, I don't need other members to tell me how to do my job. I don't need the leadership of this Congress on either side telling me how to do my job. Every one of the 435 plus 6 or 7 of the delegates in this Congress have minds that are just as sound and solid as everybody else. All we have to do is go right down to the floor right now and put on the floor a clean CR and let the body work its will. I predicted it would pass, and you all are holding it up, and you ought to be held responsible by the American people that you continue to talk about. And I want to say something else about the American people. I don't only just represent the people in my constituency, I represent the people that didn't vote that are American people. They're deserving of our consideration, and I don't need no commission to tell me nothing and for me to be walking around on the floor trying to ask a handful of people what it is that they're doing on a given day. If we ought to do it, then we ought to do what Mr. McGovern says. Let it be public and let everybody see what it is that we're doing. The Speaker has even said he wasn't going to participate in any more backroom negotiations with anybody. And here we are getting ready to establish something else that's going to be some kind of super committee over me and my constituency. Cut me some slack. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time, and this working group is an idea that I would say to you that I'm delighted that everyone has been here. I would ask the gentleman, as he hears what I'm getting ready to say, to please know that we're now on a series of votes that are going to take place, and I'd like to ask that the gentleman please come back after the floor vote, several votes. I don't know if there's 2 or 3, but ask that you come back. And that we plan to add a measure on the FAA because this hearing has gone on. We're going to keep adding ideas. As a result, we'll stand in recess until 2:15 to take up the FAA bill and the rest of this rule. We're now in recess.
Oh, you mean our... Well, I mentioned, here's the thing.
So I was going to ask you, I think, what the best path forward is to come up with a bipartisan compromise, if not this working group that they're proposing. How do we get there? So that's what.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Committee will be in order, and thank you very much. The committee was on recess with the opportunity to have members make votes, and the gentleman, Mr. Van Hollen, my dear friend from Maryland, is back and has indicated to me, because I understand it, that he's a busy guy and would hope that he would appear for just a second to see if there were any questions that a member had for him. And I see, looking to the gentleman, Mr. Hastings, I see that there are no questions there. I would ask my gentleman, is it seeking time?
I do seek time.
The gentleman's recognized.
And I recognize the gentleman's a busy man because I had the great pleasure of serving with him on the budget committee.
Yeah.
One of my great frustrations is one of the gentleman's great frustrations, and that is that we did all that work and we put together a fantastic budget, and we haven't been able to put that into action. Though, in fairness, the differences between us and the Senate, I mean, great for the first time in 4 years the Senate passed a budget, and for the first time that in 4 years we had a chance to go to conference. But when one group wants to balance in 10 years and the other group doesn't want to balance ever, if one group doesn't want to raise taxes, the other group wants to raise taxes by $1 trillion, finding that middle ground sweet spot is hard. I remember, and you've heard me say it many times, one of the greatest frustrations I've had in this House was the failure of the Joint Select Committee. Of course, you're the only member of the Joint Select Committee that is here with us today. I was glad to see on that committee, much like has been said earlier, I thought the committee was stronger for having you on it. It is still unbelievable to me today that the Joint Select Committee looked at not just 1 year of federal spending, not just 10 years of federal spending, but really had the opportunity to look way out at three-generational window, literally hundreds of trillions of dollars of federal spending, and couldn't find one single dollar of change that 12 serious men and women, House and Senate members, Republicans and Democrats, could agree upon. And we had the minority whip, Steny Hoyer, sitting right there in the chair where you are, Mr. Van Hollen. And I asked him, I said, why do you think the Joint Select Committee failed? And he said, because we tried to do the responsible thing and put sequester 12 months out after the failure. We tried to say, if the Joint Select Committee fails, we're going to give the government 12 months to adjust to that failure and implement it, because that would be the responsible thing to do. And he said, if instead we had put the pain of failure, if we had immediately connected the pain of failure to the surrender of the Joint Select Committee, that the Joint Select Committee never would have failed. Those words have stuck with me because in the 2.5 years I've had a voting card, we haven't done anything in this House that has gone to the President's desk for his signature that mattered, that wasn't driven by crisis in some way. And so what I asked the gentleman, again, ranking member of the Budget Committee, a gentleman of great intellect and great respect in this institution, if not now, around this debt limit crisis. It is. I wrote down failure to raise the debt ceiling would have grave consequences. One of my colleagues said, well, raising the debt ceiling has grave consequences too. I mean, that's not an action for which there is no pain for those who come behind us. So if not now, Mr. Van Hollen, when? And I don't say that rhetorically. The rhetoric is very good. I've seen the discipline on the other side. It's been Republican shutdown every time I've heard it today. No one's talked about the government shutdown. No one's talked about the president shutdown. It's a Republican shutdown. Lots of great discipline. But genuinely, if not now, when we're up against the wall, having been through that super committee experience, do you really believe if folks said, absolutely, Mr. President, we'll do it your way, we'll do everything you want us to do today, and then we'll try to meet you at the negotiating table tomorrow with absolutely no urgency driving us, do you really believe that we would then come to agreement in the near term on those really big issues that you and I both know we need to find agreement on? I yield to the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Woodall. Let me say it's great to have you on the Budget Committee, and we've had lots of important debates on that committee. And I would like to start just by... Yes, it is. I would like just to start where you started with respect to comparing the two budgets, because I think, as the gentleman well knows, the Republican budget only comes into balance in year 10 because it adopted major portions of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. You know that. It kept all the Medicare savings to the penny, even though your presidential and vice presidential candidates campaigned against that. It also keeps to the penny the same level of revenue that's generated by Obamacare, despite the constant criticism by your party in the House about Obamacare. So if you actually achieved your wish, which is to defund Obamacare, the House Republican budget would not be in the balance you claim it to be. And it would be close to $400 billion out of balance in year 10. So I think that's really important that people understand that as they listen to this conversation. Secondly, the issue with the supercommittee, in my view, was not so much the fact that the consequences of failure were not sort of coterminous with the end of the supercommittee, but it goes to the same issue we've been discussing for 3 or 4 years, which is what is the best way to reduce our long-term deficit? And as the gentleman recalls, in 2011, we passed the Budget Control Act. The Budget Control Act immediately placed caps on spending that will achieve over $1 trillion in deficit reduction, 100% spending. The supercommittee then could not agree on how to achieve additional $1 trillion of deficit reduction because Democrats believe we should shut down some tax breaks and generate some revenue in addition to additional cuts. Our Republican colleagues said they wouldn't do that. We then said, all right, let's create a trigger default mechanism that if we don't in the next year after that achieve another $1 trillion in deficit reduction, you would have a combination of additional cuts but also just additional revenue. Republicans didn't want to do that, and that's why the final device was to have across-the-board cuts, half in defense, half in non-defense. Now, the situation has not changed from then to now, which is that the President's budget and the Senate Democratic budget achieves long-term deficit reduction through a combination of cuts and revenue. Revenue achieved by reducing the value of deductions for high-income earners and shutting down some tax loopholes. It combines those two things, just like every bipartisan group, from Simpson-Bowles to Rivlin to Minichie, has proposed. Our Republican colleagues have said that they will not close one tax loophole for the purpose of reducing the deficit. The Speaker on national television on Sunday, when he said he wanted to have a negotiation, said he refused to consider that. And in this so-called working group charter that you've established, you say you want to reduce the deficit, but you've taken off the table the idea of closing down subsidies for big oil companies. Why would you do that? We all agree we have a long-term deficit problem, but apparently it's not serious enough for some of our Republican colleagues to consider closing tax breaks as part of the effort to make sure we don't pass that burden on to our children. And I don't see any sign from our Republican colleagues today that they want to change that. In fact, I was frankly disturbed to see that you continue to take the position that even as part of a negotiation on deficit reduction as a working group, that's not part of what the working group, that's not serious negotiation or deficit reduction.
Well, it is almost all, I'll go say all of what you say is true. Putting that in the proper context is hard. I'm glad Republicans are saying no to tax increases when those tax increases are going to go to simply additional spending, and the budget is still never ever going to go into balance. Right? What's most troubling about the Murray budget in the Senate is not that it raises $1 trillion in new taxes. That is absolutely troubling in and of itself. But what's most troubling is it raises $1 trillion in new taxes and still never balances the budget. And finding that framework on which we can agree is in my mind, the greatest challenge. What this working group would do, however, is give people an opportunity to claim those wins that can be claimed today. If we agree that we're going to continue to disagree about raising taxes, I don't think we would disagree about whether the 25% of earned income tax credit fraud that the IRS has identified ought to be stopped. Of course it should. Should it be reinvested in families that need the earned income tax credit? Perhaps. Should it go towards deficit reduction? Perhaps. But we all agree it ought to be stopped. From that foundational agreement makes it easier to move on to part two. Jack Kingston, one of our cardinals on the Appropriations Committee, sat in that chair a week ago, and he said that he genuinely believed that if we could book some of these small wins, that it would start to build into a big win. You may have been on a conference committee before. I'm much too junior to have ever been invited to the 3 that we've had since I've been in Congress. But I'm told that in those negotiations, often that is what happens, that you agree on some of the little things first and you put the big things off till the end, so that what is at stake when you get to the hardest questions is all of the progress that you've made to that point. I can't find a constituent on either side of the aisle that wouldn't like to see the Congress bank some wins, some common sense wins for families back home. I would have, Mr. Chairman, your staff may give you a note that I was going to offer an amendment to name this commission the Hastings Commission after Mr. Hastings, who recommended last week that 10 folks come together. Given his comments on the commission before our break, I don't think that's the right idea now. But I do believe that there are so many men and women here. And I've been watching this process for 20 years. I've never seen as many men and women here who would rather go home in defeat next November, on both sides of the aisle, go home in defeat next November, believing that they made a difference, than win next November playing the game the same way it's always played. And if serious members like yourself, like Mr. Hastings, like our ranking member and our chairman, if serious members cannot find a way to put that patriotism to work on both sides of the aisle, we will have missed an amazing opportunity. And again, that 12-member committee that you were on, I thought had our very best chance at that. But having been in those rooms, learned from that mistakes, there's no doubt that your counsel can make the difference between whether we continue to spin our wheels or whether we do something that really matters. I know you did not come here to play the game. You came here to do things that matter. And it is, Mr. Chairman, it's not without, it's not for nothing that I hear the gentleman say that he does not have confidence in this commission, though as a original co-sponsor of this effort, I have great hope that we can succeed, even if the deck may seem stacked against us. And I very much thank the gentleman for
I thank the gentleman. I would like nothing more to see a budget negotiation that would succeed. And I don't want to speak for the gentleman, but I know a lot of our Republican colleagues wished that the Speaker had allowed the appointment of budget negotiators so we could have been negotiating on the budget since last March when we passed it.
But since the gentleman mentioned that, I have to ask, and I'll be happy to close then, Mr. Chairman. I'm a big regular order guy, so sure, I wanted to see negotiators named. But what I've also know from watching the process is when you have two folks who are diametrically opposed on every single issue that's out there, you never name conferees, because you can't have a conference without that foundational agreement. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to balance the budget, or are we not? Are we trying to get there in a 10-year window, or are we never going to try at all? And there was no agreement whatsoever. In fact, Harry Reid said in February of 2012, we don't even need a budget process because the 302A numbers are already set by the Budget Control Act of 2011. I would tell you we're here today, not on the debt ceiling, but on the government shutdown, not because there was no budget conference, because those 302A numbers were already set by law. We're here today because the House acted on 5 bills, the Senate acted on no bills, and this has been the situation not just this year, but last year and the year before that and the year before that and the year before that. Do you really believe if you and Paul Ryan and Senator Murray, and I don't know who the ranking member is on the Senate Budget Committee, and Senator Sessions had sat down together, that as we sit here today, coming from let's raise taxes by $1 trillion, or actually let's cut taxes, coming from let's balance the budget in 10 years versus actually let's never balance the budget ever? Do you really believe that we'd have had a foundational document that would be working on
Mr.
today?
Woodall, what I do know is if you don't talk, if you don't have that budget negotiation, you can never reach that kind of agreement. And I would ask you, Mr. Woodall, what's the difference with this new working group? There's no foundational basis. It's exactly the same thing. The parties are far apart. We should be coming together. There's nothing in that document that suggests any difference with everything you've just said.
Well, the foundation may be exactly your words, which is it might not succeed, but if we don't sit down and try it, we absolutely never will succeed. And I hope we can take those words.
That's what we've been trying to do
hope we can
since
take those
March.
words to heart.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman, yields back his time. I appreciate the gentleman's dialogue between both gentlemen. The gentleman from Florida is recognized. Gentleman has no questions. Gentleman from Florida, Orlando, Florida is recognized. Gentleman's not seeking time. Gentleman from Louisville, Texas. Gentleman, Dr. Birch, gentleman's not seeking time. Mr. Van Hollen, I hope you'll go back and tell Mr. Kahn, Tom Kahn, your staff director, that I remember the days well when I served on the Budget Committee with the Chairman Jim Nussel, and that both you and I both know the exciting things that happened there. I want to thank you as a representative from the Budget Committee for being here, and gentlemen's now excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all the members. Yeah.
Do I have any further member that seeks recognition at this time? I do not see any member seeks recognition. This closes the hearing portion of H.R. 3273, Deficit Reduction and Economic Growth Working Group Act of 2013. And now I would call up H.J. Res 90, the Flight Safety Act, and would look forward to an explanation of this H.J. Res 90, and I, gentlemen, I'll yield myself such times as may consume. The purpose of this act is to fund the FAA as we have funded other portions of the government. We recognize that the men and women who protect not only Americans in the when they're in the air, but also when they're on the ground for the safety of of the airwaves and the network, including looking at the skies, is important. And I believe the FAA has some of the finest employees. I have been up in several towers around America, including the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, Addison Airport in Texas, and Mesquite Airport, Mesquite, Texas. And they are men and women who are well-balanced and do an awesome job. And so we are presenting the Flight Safety Act to the committee also. Is there further discussion? Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
You're presenting it, but we're not going to have any testimony on it?
In fact, your favorite chairman here just did that. It is consistent with, I did.
Oh, okay.
That
was what you were doing.
One of your favorites.
Well, that...
Louise, we got to have this deal. You're my favorite ranking member.
Oh, mercy.
It's a lot, and rhubarb pie is around
my
the
head
corner.
is so occupied with the fact that the dead soldiers' families can't afford to go to funerals in some cases because we can't pay the death money that we
would
pay.
expect to have.
And the VA service centers have all shut down, and but anyway, what I'm saying is we're going to do the FAA now.
Yes, ma'am.
Who's going to come up and explain that to us?
Well, as a matter of fact, I just did.
You just did.
I just did. I yielded.
Well, that's interesting. So we're just going to vote on it. Is that it?
Well, I'm open to questions.
All right. Well, let me just make a statement.
And I do appreciate the
frankly, given the fact that we've never seen it, we don't know what's in it, nobody else has seen it, knows what's in it, I hope we don't have any questions. I don't even particularly want to participate, but I want to say this. This was introduced an hour ago, and there was another appropriations bill under consideration on the House floor during that hour, which we don't do. The minority of the Appropriations Committee has not had an opportunity to review this bill and explains, I think, why they're not here to testify. And no one on our side of the Appropriations Committee had a chance to examine it. So we're being asked to vote here with no minority input of any kind. Since we're operating under martial law and go immediately to the House floor, all of our colleagues will have to vote on this rule, with no minority input from the Appropriations Committee. And I just wanted to ask if you believe that that's the way the committee should operate.
In fact, it is.
That's the only question I have for you.
Let me answer in the affirmative. It is not the way I've chosen to operate before now. This should not be considered as an indication that I will keep doing this, but we believe that the FAA and the considerations that are on the bill would be worthy of a bipartisan support, just as we did last Saturday when we tried to get that done to pay federal employees. We're trying to get them back to work, and we would love to have you.
Well, I can help you with that.
Thank you very much.
But at the proper time, I will have an amendment.
I thank the gentleman.
I'm assuming nobody's got anything to say about it, right?
I just wanted to.
Does gentlewoman
I just wanted.
Yes, I yield.
Gentlewoman yields her time. Gentleman from
I just want to
Unless
support.
you want
No,
me
I just want to support the ranking member. Her comments. I just would say, notwithstanding the fact that none of these things are going anywhere, and we're doing this theater. I would just make a suggestion respectfully to you, Mr. Chairman, just for the sake of kind of preserving the integrity of this committee and the process, and I think all of us would like to see someday a return to regular order, that when you bring things like this before the committee, the tradition is that the chairman and the ranking member testify. I think you ought to be consistent on that. There's no particular rush to get this to the floor, given the fact it's not going anywhere in the Senate. Waiting an hour, if for no other reason to go through the motions, I don't think it's too much to ask. But I am worried that we are now so far beyond regular order. We're in a whole new universe here, where, as I mentioned to you last week, the rights of the minority are not only being denied, they're being trampled on. But I would even say the rights of most of your majority are being trampled on too, because they have no idea what the hell is in all these things that are moving forward. And so I would just say again, I think as we move forward on this theater, I think we want to make sure we preserve the integrity of this committee and the rights of all the members on this committee. And I thank the chairman.
Gentleman yields back time. Gentleman, the floor is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
sir.
Mr. Chairman, this will constitute either 9 or 10 of the particular measures, and I've heard the figure thrown around of 150 different pieces. It seems to me that we could bring it all at once, and the cumulative effect of that would be a continuing resolution, which is our responsibility. And I do not, for the life of me, understand why we should be doing rifle shots as we are, when in fact we could end all of this. We would obviously get past October 17th, which is a drop-dead date, and I think my colleagues know this. I don't believe that the president or the speaker or any of us are going to sit around and toy with the importance of the debt ceiling and allow the world's economy to wobble since everybody pivots off of us. Perhaps we should focus on just how important being the repository of world funds is to us as the currency of choice of the world. And money that we owe to ourselves, we talk about what we owe others, but about 10 trillion of this 17 trillion now is money that we owe to ourselves. And it's the fundamental and rudimentary currency of the country and the world. And I just, for the life of me, don't understand why we would do this on a continuing basis. And if that's the case, then you all are really about messaging and not about policy. And I don't think it's wise that you pursue this path. And I would just ask, bring it all at once, however many pieces there are. Put them up here, let's go down and vote on all the pieces, and I believe the cumulative effect of that would be a continuing resolution. And we could do that today.
Gentleman yields back his time. I'd like to respond to my three colleagues who are asking not only very regular but normal things, and I would respond this to you. Notwithstanding whether I would have a Republican necessarily here, I do believe that it would be wise for me to extend an opportunity to Republicans and Democrats so that you could hear a Democratic member address the issues on each and every piece of legislation. And it is with my insistence that I do understand what you're saying, and it will be my, I'll give you my word that I will do my very best to be better at that this next time. And I thank all three of you for bringing this to my attention. Is there anyone that seeks time? See no time. Chairman will be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.J. Res. 89, the Federal Worker Pay Fairness Act, a closed rule. The rule provides 40 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. The rule provides one motion to recommit. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 3273, the Deficit Reduction and Economic Growth Working Group Act of 2013 under a closed rule. The rule provides 40 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Rules. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides one motion to recommit. Section 3 of the rule directs the clerk to, in the engrossment of H.J. Res. 89, add the text of H.R. 3273 as passed by the House as a new matter at the end of H.J. Res. 89 and make conforming modifications in the engrossment. The rule provides that upon the addition of the text H.R. 3273 as passed by the House to the engrossment of H.J. Res. 89, H.R. 3273 shall be laid on the table. Section 4 of the rule provides for consideration of H.J. Res. 90, the Flight Safety Act under a closed rule. The rule provides 40 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
You've now heard the motion from the gentlewoman, Vice Chairman of the Rules Committee. Is there an amendment or a discussion?
I do have an amendment.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have three closed rules here that will be combined into one, I assume, on the floor. I have no idea who writes these bills. I sort of picture somebody in the basement somewhere in a closed-off room. They're being sold. See how fast you can get one that we can get up to the Rules Committee, because this must be the committee of jurisdiction for everything, as far as I can tell. But anyway, I have an amendment to the rule. My amendment would add a new section to the end of the resolution requiring we immediately vote on the Senate's clean CR and end the government shutdown. This is another chance to do this. We've done it 3 times here, twice on the floor. Makes no sense at all that we are going to nickel and dime this government and keep people from work. We've made, I think, about all the statements that can be made, but if anybody has another one to make, I'm happy to hear it. But I'd like to bring an end to this nonsense today. It's really getting embarrassing, frankly, to be a part of what's going on here. So I present my amendment to you, Mr. Chairman. Ask for a positive vote.
Gentlewoman has made an amendment to the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor, as further discussion of the Slaughter Amendment, those in favor of the Slaughter Amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Noes have it. Noes have it.
I'd like a roll call, please.
Gentlewoman asks for a roll call.
Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Ross-Leitman?
No.
Ms. Ross-Leitman, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings?
I had, when you asked for discussion, I just have a very quick question. I'm going to obviously vote aye, but I'm confused here. We're voting on a request for a clean CR, and then when we go to the floor, there have been 3 or 4 rulings on the germaneness. Is it a fact that, and I ask you as a point of parliamentary inquiry, if in fact we vote in the Rules Committee on a matter, is that then a matter that is germane for purposes of floor proceedings?
The gentleman asked the question related to a parliamentary procedure, and I believe that the question that the gentleman asked is that we have not seen the text of the amendment yet.
We have. We've reviewed this part with the parliamentarian. It would be germane. But the rules that we had on the votes we had on the floor were on the previous question.
If the gentlewoman will allow me,
Mm-hmm.
we've just been handed the text. If the gentlewoman will allow me just a minute, then we'll be very pleased to not only answer the question from the gentleman, but to give a ruling from the chair.
Well, that's all right. I'll just I'll pass on it. I'll
Gentleman
withdraw the point of
withdraws his
parliamentary
request. Thank you
inquiry,
very
and I
much.
vote aye.
The gentleman votes aye.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Slaughter amendments not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion. Gentlewoman is recognized.
No.
I'm sorry. I saw your light. I apologize. That's normally how I tell. I do like looking at your eyes, and I will do that, and I apologize. No, I mean, you know, I look down here and see things. See, here, is there further amendment or discussion? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. The vote's now on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Gentlewoman requests roll call vote.
Ms. Fox?
Yay.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Ross-Leitman?
Aye.
Ms. Ross-Leitman, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis?
No.
Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Motion is agreed to, and I will handle this on behalf of the majority. Mr. Governor will be there for the minority. I'd like to announce that at this moment I do not have any other future hearings that are scheduled at this point. However, with that said, as we are under the idea that I'd like to ask that members be prepared to meet as quickly as possible if at some point that changes. And I thank the committee for their attendance today. We're now done with our business.